In the quiet of the morning, before the demands of the day begin to speak, the heart must come before God without masks and without excuses. This is not a moment for polished language or religious performance. This is a sacred space where honesty becomes the doorway to healing. God is not searching for perfect people. He is searching for truthful hearts. When we come to Him pretending to be strong, we remain weak. When we come pretending to be clean, we remain stained. But when we come honest, acknowledging what is broken, we open ourselves to the transforming power of His mercy. True repentance is not about feeling bad. It is about becoming real. It is the courage to stop hiding behind titles, routines, and good behavior, and instead allow God to look into the places we have kept locked away. There are thoughts we justified, attitudes we defended, and actions we minimized, but nothing is hidden from His sight. Yet even in that full exposure, His response is not rejection. His response is compassion. He already knows the truth. Repentance simply aligns our hearts with what He already sees. This kind of honesty requires humility. It means laying down pride and admitting that we cannot fix ourselves. Many people spend years managing sin instead of confessing it, controlling appearances instead of surrendering the heart. But control is exhausting and pretense is heavy. The soul was never designed to carry secrets. Confession releases the weight we have been dragging into every new day. It is not a sign of weakness. It is an act of faith that believes God's grace is greater than our failure. When we speak honestly before God, something begins to shift within us. The power of guilt starts to lose its grip because guilt thrives in silence. Shame grows in darkness, but mercy flows in the light. As truth comes out of the heart, healing begins to move in. This is why repentance is not punishment, it is freedom. It breaks the cycle of hiding and replaces it with the peace of being fully known and still fully loved. Honest repentance also reorders the heart. It realigns our desires with God's will. When we stop defending our wrongs, we become open to correction. When we stop justifying our actions, we become teachable again. This is where transformation begins, not from external pressure, but from internal surrender. God reshapes the heart that is yielded, not the one that is guarded. In the morning, this kind of prayer sets the tone for the entire day. It clears the spiritual atmosphere of yesterday's failures and makes room for today's grace. Instead of carrying guilt into our decisions, we carry humility. Instead of being driven by fear of exposure, we walk in the confidence of forgiveness. Honest repentance does not push us away from God. It draws us closer, reminding us that His mercy is new every morning and His compassion never runs out. As the morning unfolds, the cry of the heart is not merely for forgiveness, but for transformation. Forgiveness removes the record of wrong, but renewal changes the nature of the heart itself. This prayer reaches deeper than behavior and asks God to work at the core of who we are. It is an admission that surface change is not enough. Habits may be altered, words may be improved, and actions may be adjusted. Yet if the heart remains the same, the struggle will return. That is why the request is not for repair, but for creation. A clean heart is not a refurbished version of the old one. It is a divine work that only God can accomplish. The heart is the control center of life. From it flow thoughts, decisions, emotions, and desires. When the heart is burdened with unresolved guilt, hidden motives, or lingering wounds, everything else becomes affected. Relationships suffer, faith weakens, and joy fades. Asking God for a clean heart is acknowledging that no amount of discipline or willpower can purify what has been stained on the inside. Only the Creator can recreate. This prayer places the heart back in the hands of the one who formed it in the first place. To ask for a renewed heart is also to surrender ownership. It means releasing the belief that we know what is best for ourselves. A renewed heart is teachable, responsive, and sensitive to the voice of God. Where the old heart resisted correction, the renewed heart welcomes it. Where the old heart reacted out of fear or pride, the renewed heart responds with wisdom and humility. Renewal changes not only what we do, but why we do it. Motives are purified, desires are refined. The hunger for temporary satisfaction is replaced with a longing for lasting righteousness. This renewal also addresses the residue of the past. Even after forgiveness, memories can linger and emotions can remain bruised. A renewed heart is not haunted by yesterday's failures. God does not simply remove the stain, He heals the fabric. He restores the capacity to trust again, to hope again, and to love without suspicion. The heart that was once guarded becomes open, not because it is naive, but because it is secure in God's grace. When God creates a clean heart, it produces consistency. Faith becomes more than a moment, it becomes a lifestyle. Obedience flows naturally, not out of fear of punishment, but out of love and gratitude. The renewed heart desires what pleases God, not because it has to, but because it wants to. This interchange empowers us to walk in freedom, no longer pulled back by the same cycles and temptations. Beginning the day with this prayer reshapes our posture toward life. We step forward not relying on yesterday's strength, but on today's mercy. With a renewed heart, we are no longer defined by what we did, but by what God is doing within us. Breaking free from sin, guilt, and hidden bondage begins with understanding that these are not just moral issues, but spiritual weights that affect every part of life. Sin is deceptive because it rarely presents itself as captivity at first. It often appears as relief, escape, or control, yet over time it builds walls around the heart and limits spiritual movement. What once felt manageable slowly becomes a master. Guilt then steps in not to correct, but to condemn, constantly reminding the soul of failure and reinforcing the belief that change is impossible. This prayer confronts that lie and declares that bondage does not have the final word. Hidden bondage is especially dangerous because it thrives in secrecy. What remains unconfessed grows stronger, and what is ignored gains authority. Many carry invisible chains into their daily routines, chains of addiction, bitterness, lust, fear, or self-rejection. These chains may not be visible to others, but they drain energy, steal peace, and dull spiritual sensitivity. The prayer for freedom is not a shallow request for relief. It is a bold demand for deliverance at the root. It recognizes that true freedom requires exposure, surrender, and divine intervention. Guilt often becomes the loudest voice in the mind, replaying past mistakes and magnifying them beyond God's mercy. It keeps people trapped in cycles of regret, convincing them they are disqualified from joy, purpose, and intimacy with God. Yet guilt is not a tool of transformation. It is a tool of oppression. Conviction draws us toward repentance and restoration, but guilt pushes us toward shame and isolation. This prayer draws a clear line between the two, rejecting the voice that condemns and embracing the voice that heals. Freedom also requires a shift in identity. Bondage persists when people define themselves by their struggle rather than by God's promise. When failure becomes the label, it limits faith and weakens resolve. This prayer speaks to identity, reminding the heart that deliverance is not earned through effort, but received through grace. God does not free us because we are strong. He frees us because He is faithful. The chains break not by human willpower, but by divine authority. As bondage begins to loosen, there is often resistance. The familiar patterns of sin fight to remain because they have shaped routines and comfort zones. Freedom can feel unfamiliar and even uncomfortable at first. This is why the prayer asks God to loose the soul completely, not partially. Partial freedom leaves room for return, but complete surrender invites lasting change. God does not merely unlock the door, He leads us out of the prison. When freedom takes root, it restores clarity and peace. The mind becomes lighter, the spirit more responsive, and the heart more open. Life is no longer lived under the weight of secrecy and shame, but in the confidence of grace. This freedom is not fragile. It is sustained by daily dependence on God. The chains are broken, the voice of guilt is silenced, and the soul learns to walk unburdened, guided by mercy rather than fear. The cry for restoration of joy, hope, and spiritual strength comes from a place many believers know well, the place where faith still exists, but delight has faded. Life's pressures, repeated disappointments, and unresolved pain can slowly drain the joy that once felt natural and effortless. Joy is often the first thing to suffer when the heart has been under constant strain. Worship becomes quiet. Prayer feels heavy and spiritual passion weakens. This prayer recognizes that joy is not self-generated. It is a gift that must be restored by God Himself. True joy is not the same as happiness. Happiness depends on circumstances, but joy is rooted in relationship. When joy fades, it is often because connection has been strained, not because faith is gone. The prayer does not ask for entertainment or emotional excitement. It asks for the joy of salvation to return. That joy comes from remembering who God is, what He has done, and what He has promised. It is the joy of being forgiven, chosen, and held by grace even when life feels uncertain. Hope also requires restoration because hope can be worn down by waiting. Delayed answers, repeated prayers, and unmet expectations can quietly convince the heart to stop expecting anything good. Hope doesn't usually disappear suddenly. It erodes slowly through disappointment. This prayer pushes back against that erosion. It asks God to revive expectation, to breathe life into dreams that were laid down out of exhaustion rather than surrender. Restored hope lifts the eyes again, allowing the heart to believe that God is still at work, even when progress is unseen. Spiritual strength is restored alongside joy and hope. When joy is gone and hope is weak, spiritual strength diminishes. Faith becomes reactive instead of confident. The prayer acknowledges that strength does not come from striving harder, but from being refreshed by God's presence. Just as the body needs rest to function properly, the soul needs renewal to remain resilient. God restores strength by reminding the heart of its source, shifting focus away from self and back to Him. As joy returns, praise rises naturally. Worship no longer feels forced because it flows from gratitude instead of obligation. As hope is restored, fear loses its grip. Decisions are no longer driven by anxiety, but guided by trust. As spiritual strength is renewed, endurance increases. The believer is able to stand firm, not because circumstances are easy, but because the inner life has been fortified. This restoration changes how life is experienced. Challenges remain, but they no longer dominate the emotional landscape. Joy becomes a steady undercurrent rather than a fleeting moment. Hope becomes anchored rather than fragile. Spiritual strength becomes consistent rather than conditional. The prayer declares that weariness is not permanent, that heaviness can be lifted, and that God is able to restore what pressure and pain have tried to steal. Dependence on God's presence and spirit is the foundation of a living, growing faith. Without His presence, spiritual life becomes mechanical, and without His spirit, even good actions lose their power. This prayer recognizes that it is possible to function without God's nearness, but it is impossible to flourish without it. Many people learn how to maintain routines, fulfill responsibilities, and appear strong on the outside while their inner life grows dry. The heart may still believe, but the soul becomes tired because it is operating without continual connection to its source. God's presence is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is in His presence that clarity is restored, burdens are lightened, and direction becomes clear. When the prayer asks not to be cast away, it reveals a deep understanding that distance from God is the greatest loss a person can experience. Success, recognition, and progress mean little if they come at the cost of intimacy with Him. The soul was designed to thrive in closeness to God, and when that closeness is weakened, restlessness takes over. The Spirit of God is the sustaining power behind transformation. Rules can inform behavior, but only the Spirit can change desire. Without the Spirit, faith becomes driven by effort rather than relationship. The prayer acknowledges this dependence by asking God not to withdraw His Spirit. This is not fear-based pleading. It is relational awareness. It is the recognition that guidance, conviction, comfort, and strength all flow from the Spirit's work within the heart. When the Spirit is active, sensitivity returns. The heart becomes responsive instead of resistant. There is an awareness of God's leading in everyday decisions, not just in major moments. The Spirit teaches, corrects, and reassures, keeping the soul aligned with God's will. Without that guidance, people often rely on instinct, emotion, or external pressure, which can lead them away from peace and purpose. Dependence on God's presence also reshapes priorities. What once seemed urgent loses its dominance, and what truly matters comes into focus. Time with God becomes nourishment rather than obligation. Prayer shifts from duty to dialogue. Worship becomes an expression of gratitude rather than a ritual. This dependence is not weakness, it is wisdom. It acknowledges that human strength has limits, but God's power does not. As dependence deepens, Confidence grows, not confidence in self, but confidence in God. Fear decreases because the heart knows it is not navigating life alone. The Spirit provides courage in uncertainty, peace in pressure, and endurance in seasons of waiting. Life is no longer about proving worth or maintaining control, but about trusting God's presence to lead, sustain, and protect. This prayer affirms that the greatest gift God gives is Himself. More than answers, more than breakthroughs, more than success, the soul needs His nearness. In His presence, the heart is anchored, the mind is settled, and the spirit is strengthened to walk faithfully, regardless of what the day holds. Rising into the day forgiven and free is a declaration of faith that reshapes how life is approached from the very first moment. It means the past no longer sets the tone for the present. Forgiveness is not just something received in prayer, it is something lived out in daily confidence. When the heart truly accepts that it has been cleansed, it no longer wakes up rehearsing yesterday's failures. Instead of beginning the day under a cloud of regret, the soul steps forward with clarity, peace, and expectation. Freedom changes posture. A forgiven heart stands differently, thinks differently, and responds differently. The weight of shame no longer bends the shoulders, and the fear of exposure no longer controls decisions. This freedom is not denial of the past, it is release from its authority. The prayer affirms that guilt has been dealt with, chains have been broken, and condemnation no longer has a voice. What once defined the identity has been replaced by grace. Walking into the day forgiven also restores confidence in relationship with God. Prayer becomes natural rather than hesitant. Worship becomes sincere rather than restrained. When forgiveness is fully embraced, there is no need to earn God's approval through performance. The heart understands that acceptance has already been given. This assurance creates boldness, not arrogance, but a quiet confidence that allows the believer to live openly and honestly before God. Freedom also affects choices. When the soul is no longer driven by shame, it is no longer drawn to the same destructive patterns. Freedom does not mean temptation disappears, but it means temptation no longer holds the same power. The believer is able to say no, not out of fear, but out of strength. The prayer speaks to this new way of walking, where obedience flows from gratitude rather than obligation. Rising, forgiven, and free also influences how others are treated. Mercy received becomes mercy extended. Patience increases because the heart remembers its own need for grace. Judgment softens and compassion grows. A free heart is not defensive, it is generous. It no longer needs to prove worth or protect an image because identity is secure. This freedom sets the tone for endurance throughout the day. Challenges still come, but they are faced without the added burden of guilt. Mistakes may happen, but they no longer spiral into shame. The heart learns to quickly return to grace instead of retreating into condemnation. Freedom creates resilience, the ability to recover, refocus, and continue forward without losing faith. To rise forgiven and free is to step into the day aligned with truth rather than fear. It is to walk with an unburdened spirit, knowing that mercy has already gone ahead. The prayer declares that this day will not be lived under old labels or past failures, but under the covering of grace, guided by faith and strengthened by the confidence that freedom is not temporary, but a daily reality sustained by God's mercy.